All right, I know it's pretty late, second day, and you have been here from yesterday. So hopefully I can add some value on the, through talking through the journey of Uber. Actually, it's like 30 plus members work for last 2 years. What I'm going to share with you, some of the learnings, and this was not easy, and of course we haven't figured this out before we started doing things. So what we are going to show you is what we learned on the way. And as I said, this is a lot of people's work that I'm presenting. So data science, engineering, and product management. But most of the things that I'm going to talk about is data science. Little bit of introduction of myself. I head the data science at experimentation and segmentation domain for Uber, and I come from statistics and economics background. And before this, I led the data science at Adobe and PayPal. I have been with Uber for 2 years. I am, kind of from day one of this particular engine of experimentation and segmentation. What we want to achieve today, one thing I want to call out is that I'm going to talk about a lot of concepts. And the idea of this is that we will not be able to cover everything in detail. So if you have any follow-up question, or if you want to look for what each one of them mean, my idea would be just to introduce the concepts to you, and then eventually you might want to follow up or ask me questions afterwards. I'm happy to stay and answer any of your questions. All right, before we start for all the nice stuff, how many people know what personalization means? Mostly, and I think it's pretty important for the organizations, right? Everybody wants to do personalization at some level. Let me ask you this question. How many of you like coffee? Pretty decent size. How many of you like tea? All right, so now the question is, if the coffee drinkers I serve coffee and the tea drinkers I serve tea all the time, do we capture the audience? Do we capture 100% all the time? All the people who like coffee giving coffee, all the people like tea giving tea? No, right? Why not? Here's the problem, and this is the big problem for Uber. The organization like Uber, this is very inherent. The problem is that the coffee drinkers don't like coffee all the time. They prefer coffee in general, but there are times, there are certain, of course there will be people who will be liking coffee all the time. But there will be a section of reasonable thought, is that there will be a section of people who would say, you know what, in the evening when I'm sitting there and watching a Warriors game, I like to just have a cup of tea. There are people like that, right? But all other time, in the morning, I prefer coffee. So here personalization becomes very, very important. It is not person dependent. Personalization doesn't mean what you prefer. It means what you prefer at a specific time, at a specific location. This is what I'm going to talk about today, of what does that mean. So in general, I'm just going to ramp you up of what the topics would be. Little bit of Uber, okay? I'm not going to go over each of those bullet points, but this is what 2 trillion pieces of data are processed each day. This is where we stand, right? There are huge driver, rider, and all other characteristics that you can think about Ubers are processing. Now, why is personalization difficult for Uber? Let's talk about this. Uber is actually a 2- and 3-sided marketplace, okay? Now, many of you either might work on one-sided, have one group of customers, or having a certain set of customers. But what is most important to remember here is that what is good for drivers may not be good for riders, okay? What is good for an eater means, if you just don't know these terms, Uber cars, whoever is driving a regular core business, we call driver and rider. Uber Eats, the people who deliver are called courier. Like the people who drive the food and deliver at your place are called couriers, and the people who eats the food are called eaters, means whoever is ordering, all right? The challenge is here. If you notice, 2-sided marketplace in the case of Uber driver rider, 3-sided marketplace when it comes to Eats. Why? Who is the third partner? Is the restaurants. This makes personalization super complicated, okay? Because the personalization has huge network effect. What is good for a driver may not be good for a rider, and vice versa. How do we overcome those challenges? All right, personalization is a moving target. This is very important to remember and very important lesson, okay? Personalization doesn't mean something is good for one person all the time. It means that it always changes. Now it brings different difficult challenges. If your data science team has built models that says if you deliver this customer X, Y will happen, you roll that up in the model and how many times you have seen that doesn't work? It doesn't work because your preference changes. It doesn't work because what you have done yesterday does not mean that it will be happening today. I have learned, there is a very interesting thing. Yesterday, this morning, I was talking to a person, and that person gave me a quote. Of course, that we can argue what that quote has a meaning or not, but the quote was the best thing to learn from history is not to basically focus on only history, right? That's the best thing to learn. And I say, okay, fine, that's great, right? Because most of our models are based on historical data. Most of them. You are basically saying prediction and all those. It doesn't really know what you would prefer at that point of time. And we are going to talk about how do you know that without a model. But most likely, the synopsis of this slide is that for all these marketplaces, you have time, location, and life cycle. What does life cycle mean? Life cycle mean that are you a seasoned driver? Are you a new driver? Are you a driver who have used Uber and didn't like it? There are very different individuals, right? You cannot have, so what stage driver? For example, if I have been an Uber driver and I've been driving for last 2 years, I will have different expectation from Uber than a person that actually joined Uber, right? Of course, there is thing. So time, location, and where we are on the life cycle stage matters a lot for personalization. And what does it relate to? It relates to preference and action. Preference is what, again, as I said, is a moving target. Your preference is not constant. Your preference changes over time. And then you take action is also not constant. You take certain action, certain time. Let's think about this problem a little more, okay? From the data science perspective. What do we do as a data science leader, and what does the leadership actually, we should enable? So the idea of leadership, is to make sure you ask the right question, drive your team to the right direction, right? The leadership doesn't mean that you go and solve each and every problem, but you do have to remember if your team come up with and say, this is what I do for personalization, you ask the right question, if it's depending on your business context. Again, this is what worked for Uber, doesn't mean that it will work for everything. You know your business well. I'm giving a framework of few different here and there points that we have learned in the process. So the question really is, why does personalization help? By the way, let me tell you this thing. Never actually do personalization for improving a financial metrics. If you chase a financial metric, you would not deliver the best experience. So a lot of people think about this way, right? When people think about metrics, they think about revenue being the first metric. Then they break down the revenue and say, oh, these are my leading metrics to the final goal, North Star metric, which is revenue. It's actually not a very good thing to do, okay? The thing is, if you are indexed towards revenue, you are not going to optimize the best customer experience. In the long run, it's not good. So let me take an example. What will happen if all of a sudden we rolled out an experience and then we see a lot of drivers loving the drive? And it's very simple, right, to do that. What is the best thing to do that? Best way you can do that? Just give $1,000 to everyone. I can guarantee you that they will drive more. Of course, right? But the question is here. The question is that the right thing to do? Or is that the metric we will generate more trips? No, that is not a thing. What is the right thing to do is that their experience actually is better. And you have to find out indicators and metrics that measures the experience being better. Okay, and we'll talk about a few things of that. For example, don't index on financial metric. Financial metric will eventually show up as you move forward, but make sure you optimize the experience. So you analyze the behavioral traits, you form persona. I'm going to talk about this very important step. What does forming persona mean? You develop a hypothesis. Of course, you experiment and you optimize. Segmentation and experimentation are key for personalization. Many of the teams you have noticed as a data science leader, a lot of times actually I would say many times you are actually doing most of your work in experimentation and segmentation. And I will tell you what I mean by that. When I say segmentation, doesn't mean that you are going to come up with 50 segments. It means that you are trying to understand your customer behaviors. So your work, I would say, as most of the organization would be 80% of the time you're trying to understand your users and trying to then innovate on those users. Why do we do experimentation? Innovating, risk-free innovation, right? That's why you do experimentation. And you have to do experimentation because that's a way you can get to the next stage. All right, this is a key problem. We do over-segmentation. If you do a data science teams, if you have organized, how many times you have seen that you have all the way slice and dice of data? You will have crazy segmentation that is not actionable. What is the problem, with that kind of segmentation? Is that you get insights from those segments, but you cannot take action, okay? Because either those segments are super small or these segments overlaps and doesn't create a business value, right? They're very good for analytics, but they're not actionable, okay? So the first thing would be that increasing effort, we put all of these efforts understanding our users, but doesn't translate it into any impact, right? It just becomes good, fancy PowerPoint slides. That's all it becomes. And then it doesn't do anything good after that. So here is our challenge. It is probably the traditional, little bit of non-traditional way, but don't try to break down your data too much, okay? First, try to have a high level, okay? For example, among drivers, let's say I'm taking a random example. Who are my high-frequency drivers and who are my low-frequency drivers? I start from there, very high-level segment. First of all, is that the segment good or not? I want to know. I don't need to do all fancy stuff. We can go crazy, right? You can go the driver who drives San Francisco within 6 miles and weekends do this. Okay, how does that segment help? You cannot do anything with that, right? So what we want to focus on that you have to, when you do segmentation, make sure you have a plan of action and you have a way to measure that action, okay? If you have these 3 framework, then only do segmentation, okay? Otherwise, when somebody is showing you a certain segment, ask them how can you enable that segment to do better, or is that segment your right business, this thing. All right, I'm not going to go over all those things, but you can think about, most of the companies do it, right? They have this 360 view of profile. I have heard probably many times that the 360 profile is so important, right? Like for example, 360 degree of users. We all talk about that. And then we build a lot of predictive model based on those particular users, and we decide and we iterate, right? So smart user experience from data and science, that is very critical. What we mean by that is that you have a lot of data, behavioral data, attribute data, and huge amount of data for all these users. What you're really looking to do is basically create a persona. This is the step towards persona. What do I mean by persona? Meaning, if I ask you that you are a high frequency driver, or if you're a high frequency rider, what does that mean? Can anybody say, is that a person? Like if I'm a person, can you describe me saying that I'm a high frequency driver outside? Probably not, right? The thing is, behind all of the behaviors, there is something you are as a person, okay? What we call that as psychographic profile, okay? This is a behavioral science, basically driven, data science. So what does the behavioral science do? Is basically translate all of your data, all sort of segment your data scientists have built, and construct a persona, okay? What does that persona mean? For example, the trait of all these behaviors, it will say your actual behavior is agreeableness, right? You are more like agreeable. And what you can see the cohort recommendations for those. But long story short, if you don't understand this slide in detail or read through, only one talking point is all of your data describe you as a person at the end of the day, and our job is to figure out who that person is. You are as a person, where we can map, and that has to be company specific. Here are some examples what we came up with. Okay, these are not the actual segments, so This is like a dummy thing. I am not going to share the actual segment here, but this is kind of dummy I put together. But think about this: social enthusiast, active urbanized, family heroes. How many segments do you have? 5. It is actionable now, right? Because now you can kind of figure out what they need and how these things behave. Of course, there are many ways to do it. It's not a very easy exercise. But long story short is that you have to go individual data attribute to something to know who your users are at a personal level. Okay? Personal level doesn't mean that your high frequency or weekday behavior are something you do, not somebody who you are. Okay? Maybe when you go to a club on the weeknights or something, you are maybe fun loving. When you have many, take many rides to go to restaurants and all, you might be an outgoing fun loving person. So that's how we describe you. I can probably give you a little bit of what you create a segment. Again, the main point here is don't do over segmentation. Okay? Try to start from very high level and then see if you can build a persona from those attributes and segments and behaviors that you have created. That's first step for personalization. Okay? Now what happens after that? Now you have to take the action part. Remember we talked about how do you do users and then take action? So now comes the action part. How many times do we know what will user like? I talked about this, that your preference, time, location, and life cycle stage is actually is what important for personalization, right? But how do you know that? How do you validate that part? Because it's super hard to predict any model, right? Can you build a model that will tell you at this particular location, this point of time, you will do this? Of course, you can probably a sophisticated model. You can measure false positive rate and all those. But what is the best way to learn it? The best way to learn it is that throwing that in the market, let user behave, and you measure and alter. I'm going to talk about what that means. Here comes the main thing. This is, if you don't understand all the terminology, it's totally fine. As long as you know something here, and then you can probably look it up. But here comes one thing. What we call is called basically continuous experimentation. Continuous experimentation differs from standard A/B test. What does standard A/B test do? Standard A/B test do say that you throw this out and you say, give me the winner or give me the thing that is performing very well. And what happens in that process is again coffee and tea problem. Originally I started with coffee and tea. Imagine that this group of people, you all are, I have split in 50-50 and I have given coffee and tea and I'm measuring which one people like. And what will happen, my next action? So the first step is that I figure out which which one is preferred between coffee and tea among this group of people. How do I do that? Split 50-50. And then I'm seeing whether coffee wins, number of people taking coffee, or tea wins. What's my follow-up action? Whatever wins, I'm going to give to all of you. That's what you do, right, in A/B test? Basically, that means, literal terms, I'm going to do coffee and tea, and I think based on the hands you guys raised, coffee wins, and I'm going to give coffee to everyone. Okay, this is what's going to happen. Does it work in Uber setting? Think about a driver, okay, who is working super hard, okay, really making like very, very hard, and I'm giving a certain incentive to that driver who is working super hard. And think about another driver who is just driving for hobby and probably driving like 1 or 2 hours. If I give both these drivers same incentives, I don't think we're doing the right thing, right? So, of course, we need to know, based on these attributes that it is not about, we have to do certain level of personalization. This is what we call is multi-arm bandit. So multi-arm bandit is a concept of continuous allocation. So what happens, just to give a very 30-second summary, is basically you give an experience, so in this case coffee and tea, and basically what it will do, it will basically figure out who likes coffee and who likes tea, and then allocate them. And if you like coffee and tea in a certain amount of time, it will readjust and give you coffee that point of time from next time. First time you won't get it. Second time you figured out that you don't like coffee, you actually like tea, and it then go and give it tea for you the next time, second time onwards. Basically, that is in brief. It's a continuous, continuously you are experimenting and measuring. This is very important for us, okay? Very specific to Uber and the companies like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, everyone probably have that. What we call is network effect. This is what happens when you have 2- and 3-sided marketplace, okay? What happens is that we are going to give you, let's say, something for driver, which is good for drivers. And then what happens is it basically impacts the riders. Let's think about an example. One of the example I want to talk about is, let's say, tipping, okay? I know majority of us, of course, like tipping drivers, right? And then would love to have. But what would have happened if I would have said mandatory tipping percentage is 30% of your trip value, okay? Remember, you have a driver and rider in your experiment, okay? What will happen? Drivers will be delighted, right? 30% of the actual people getting more money. So if your metrics is driver trips, is going to have high impact, right? What will happen to riders? Okay, riders will not take the trip. So now the challenge comes, okay? Your treatment, which is basically you've given this to driver, will tell, yeah, this experiment performs super well for drivers, okay? And then your rider on the other side haven't taken any trips. So you have a huge supply-demand imbalance, right? You have drivers driving. So what happened? What is the negative impact on that? Some people might say, okay, what's bad with that? One thing is riders are not really getting the trips. They have a high ET and other stuff because they're rejecting, they're canceling the trips because it's not a good experience to pay. They don't want to pay that much money. Here is the detrimental impact. Drivers are super happy, but here will happen. Their total earnings will drop. Why? Because if there is nobody requesting trips, you don't get to drive, right? So think about this problem. In one side, you have 30% higher trips, driver driving more, want to drive more, not driving more, I want to drive more. Riders saying, I don't want to take a trip with Uber. And what happens it's actually detrimental effect to both the sides. Rider is not getting trips, driver is not getting earnings at a large scale in a weekly basis. So 30% X trips doesn't matter, right? So this is what we call a network effect. Network effect is super important. What is important for driver? We have to measure the entire marketplace and the network that we do. As a data science team leaders, I think you would hear about, there are many companies do many other ways. Again, I'm not going to go over all of this. Long story short, there are various models. When you think about personalization, there are two, high level, there could be many, very high level, two things that happen. One, as a user, you get recommendations. For example, you go to Amazon and you say, you bought this, other users bought this. You basically have recommendation and ranking, what we call it as. If you think over it, overall, the world of personalization, you go to Yelp, you go to Amazon or anywhere, at the end of the day, you get recommendation and ranking, okay? That's one experience that you get. The bunch of models your teams built, right? There's always there's a humongous teams in every organization to building recommendation, right? And you are always fine-tuning your recommendation to maximize the value of recommendation. That's one side. The second one is somebody says, okay, I'm not going to provide recommendation, but I'm going to force you into an experience. I won't say force, but I feel that you would be better off by showing that experience and not showing something else. What is the example? For example, if you go to an e-commerce site, you have a history of basically ordering garments, and you do that 5 times, buy red color garments. 6th time you go, you kind of see red color stuff on the top. You have to really navigate hard to go through another green color. And that's, we call it forcing into a different experience, because they figured out that you like red. And they kind of showing you that experience all the time. So recommendation and workflow, that is the thing. But long story short, in both the settings, you need a bunch of models, and your data science teams will come up with a lot of modeling that they do. I think LinkedIn, if I remember right, has like 100+ people in the recommendation and ranking. I think, if I'm not correct, please feel free to correct me, but that's what I heard. So it's kind of really super important to understand which of these you are trying to do. Now here the critical part, as a leader we need to remember. The predictive model, a lot of machine learning models that your team is doing is based on historical behavior with no intervention. What do you mean by no intervention? Meaning that most of these actually are understanding your user behavior. For example, if you want to know who are the people likely to churn in your system, that means that you are just saying, okay, these are the people likely to churn. They have a higher churn score, and you have a great machine learning team, build out all sort of deep learning, neural net, classical machine learning model, used it and predicted churn score, okay? The question then is, okay, you have all sort of models. You can, like I have seen people doing, even at Uber, a lot of sophisticated modeling to understand the users, and you do that. Now the question is, what does intervention mean? What does an intervention mean? In general term, intervention means that you try to change their behavior. That's intervention for some way, right? So for example, I come here, I say, okay, you are a driver in the system, and I see you are not driving more. Your probability of churning is increasing. Your predictive model says, you are a driver, you are more likely to churn in 4 weeks. Okay, that's what your machine learning model says. Then you do something about it, right? What do? You experiment, right? You experiment. And when you experiment, you say, okay, I hypothesize these drivers may not even know some of the product features that we have. I'll take a live example. A lot of in our platform, the drivers are churning. They did not know that they can take break in between of the trips. I don't know how many of you even know. Even at Uber Rider, I think you do not know that while you are taking a long trip, you can actually pause your trip and take a break, okay? Many drivers did not know. So they were kind of tired, and they was like, no, I cannot take a break, I need to take a break for food and blah, blah, blah. So when we said, okay, you're churning, and we didn't go and, it's not possible for us to go and ask every driver, why are you churning? So we said, okay, majority of them, maybe because of that, we experimented with basically highlighting them. When they opened the app, we highlighted them and saying that you can take a break here in between. And guess what happened? Churn, many of them did not churn. We can't move all the people. Some people did not churn. Some is better, right? So in this case. So it's kind of your lost customer. If you get somebody back, it's good. By the way, one important thing to remember, you cannot measure the financial metric in this. What we are getting indexing for? We're indexing for that your driver is not tired. He has a certain time that he doesn't want to drive, and you don't want them to drive like crazy hours, right? So you're going to enabling that happen, and that's why take care of your customer, basically optimize the metrics that your customers like. You would get the benefit in the long run. That's kind of, I can guarantee you that. So what these things are, uplift modeling is an incremental value. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this is. I think there was also a session I remembered in Rev yesterday, somebody spoke about uplift modeling. So, but kind of getting popular. It's not a very popular technique, in the industry. A lot of people don't know about it. But I'm going to be quickly telling simple terms what that is. The only difference between offline and online is that offline you run an intervention, you collect the data, and you analyze. And then you do again, launch another experiment, collect the data, and you analyze. So basically this process of collecting data and analyzing happening offline. Basically means from your data infra systems like Hadoop, Vertica, Presto. Online basically means it's happening real time. And these are the techniques that are actually helpful for happening real time. What does it mean real time? Meaning that it's figuring out, you are a driver, what you are liking at some point of time, and it's readjusting your experience. Okay? By the way, are all those readjustments good? It may not be, but here is the story, right? If it is not good, the system will learn in few hours. Then you run an experiment for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks you are stuck with that. Nothing can happen. And then you cannot act on it, right? So yes, we might actually provide a wrong experience. The system that, because it's all your models, we might provide a wrong experience to the person, but what is the benefit of what we are doing is that system is adaptive, it's learning quickly. And learning quickly and doing the right thing, that's the most important thing. It's learning quickly and doing the right thing rather than you lock in an experiment for a fixed amount of time. So this is a summary. You have a certain behavior, you have no intervention. That means I haven't done anything for you, and you can say how people typically would behave. Then you inject intervention, okay, and you model how people would behave. This is what we call it response modeling that I'm going to show. And then, of course, you have intervention and no intervention, then you can do a few things. Okay, the question is, if you do intervention versus you do no intervention, what do you think will happen? For example, if I know that these are the drivers that are likely to churn, but I don't do anything about it, versus the people who I know likely to churn and I do something about it. What is that called? That's called uplift. Basically what happens is that's the incremental that you are going to get out of personalization. Okay? If you don't do anything, they will churn. Let's say your churn rate is 5%. Do not do anything, it will be 5%. Do something, it might be 3%. Okay? What did you save? You saved 2%. That's your benefit. Okay? That's what it means in simple terms. 3 different kind of ideas. Okay? Overall, most of the data science organization build these 3 types of model. Propensity scoring, okay, which is probabilistic model on classical machine learning models you can have seen. Response model, which is again, what would be your response, and then uplift model. Okay, I'm going to briefly talk about that, but if you're an organization leader for data science, you would probably know that, okay, your organization and mostly people are bucketed in these 3 categories. They're building a lot of predictive models, right? Like we have seen analytics companies, they build a lot of predictive behavioral model, on the analytics. But the hard part is that you cannot, all these models are having no intervention. Basically, you're building models that are based on customers' behavior with minus intervention. Your intervention is most likely done in-house. Most of the organization have to build those models in-house, okay, for the intervention part of it, because it's kind of business and domain and other stuff. So, very interesting example. Here, this is a box of framework that I want to, whatever you do, you are doing a modeling for certain things, right? As I said, your modeling shouldn't be just providing insights. Because of course, there is value in that, but you have to have a certain framework in mind that you are investing in a modeling effort or an organization to do modeling for certain things, right? There are a few things to have. For example, what's the benefit of modeling someone or intervening someone that is anyway going to take a trip? For example, if I'm a rider, I'm going to commute to Uber to office every day. What's the benefit of giving me incentives? Almost nothing, right? What does that mean? It means I'm wasting money. Okay? I do not need an incentive. This is my need. Even if I don't do anything, I will take a trip. You can't do much. Okay? And there are people, no matter what you do, will not take a trip through Uber. For example, they might just drive. Maybe they are in South Bay, they're somewhere else, or Uber is not required. What's the advantage of giving them an incentive for Uber? You might get one trip out of it. Might be you going in somewhere and then you get one trip out of it, but that's it. You're not going to get anything beyond that. Okay? So, main thing to remember, take a trip, column-wise, row-wise, guaranteed. Don't take a trip, no trip. Column-wise, the second one, dead ducks, meaning you cannot do anything about that. Then the question is, what we want to basically optimize is the people who would not take a trip unless you intervene. Okay? That's the incremental. Okay? That means that they would not take a trip without you doing something about it. or without you offering certain things. This is what your modeling strategy should be, super important. Your modeling should be, you need to understand your customer behavior of who would be the people who would be responding to it, who are the people who would never respond to it, no matter what you do, and who are the people who would be responding if you do something about it. Your data science modeling need to do something about that. And that's what should be your modeling strategy that you would like to do. Here is the few things I have called out. Somebody who will propensity model, no intervention. It gives you all the, by the way, if you are wondering what is propensity model, all classification, regression, and all these predictive models that your teams are building fall into this category of propensity model, like the basically predictive behavior. And then incremental and don't touch. Incremental model is truly the uplift model that gives you that incremental benefit of if somebody will only respond if you intervene. So coming back to that coffee and tea and Pepsi environment, what happens? Look at these particular things. If the user likes coffee, you give them coffee. If the user likes Pepsi or soft drinks, give them soft drinks. And it's also, you can see over here, it's different from A/B test. Some people, so there are 4 groups of users in this, if you notice. One group of users would like coffee. One group of users will like a soft drinks. One group of users would not take soft drinks ever. One group of users will not take coffee ever. So now the question is, the personalization is optimizing that experience using uplift model to providing who likes what. A very simple case study, motivating example. This is a live example of personalization that we have done and would be done in 5 minutes. So hopefully you can get the day wrap up. What product features should you recommend to which user cohort? This is a personalization question, right? Your 2 sides, you have segmentation question, and you have to know which product features would recommend. Know that these are the 3 product features currently exist in the market. We have pause button, flex pay, and trip preference. So this is just to calibrate what those are, basically. But here's an example of churn prevention. You have a personalized email, and basically you do all these modeling techniques, and you figure out a group of drivers, and you say, okay, should this be, what all these product feature you should basically get. So we recommended this group of drivers, certain product feature that they should look into. And this is the outcome. We actually have very significant personalized product experience. By the way, 1% is pretty large for us, right? Because it's like numbers are huge, so 1% is not small. 1% is few millions of dollars. But you can imagine that generic email versus personalized product experience, how it is actually improved. By the way, again, as I said, don't look for your financial metric, look for retention, engagement, experience. That's where we have indexed on. Summary, this is my last slide. So few things to remember. Understanding user behavior is a key thing. Start with understanding why does user behave certain ways. Make sure that metrics are not just a financial metric, but the metrics are something you can actually construct. Have a modeling strategy, okay, to make sure, like for example, why you are doing the modeling, what is the need of you. I have seen a lot of people do like, lot of fancy modeling like clustering and other stuff, but they don't really, if I ask them, okay, what will be the use of this model, like I'm not too sure, maybe just cool insights. Most of the time, I think you have to understand, and maybe your organization is different, but many times actually data scientists love to do technology, which is a one good thing to do. You can do research is this thing, but you're indexing for business outcome, then you need to know what your modeling strategy is and how your modeling and intervention is actually add value. If you have your business which has a network effect, means if you impact one group of customers, it will impact another group. Uber, Airbnb, like host and people who are residing, eBay, sellers and buyers, this kind of environment. Make sure that when you are doing something, you have thought about the other side, right? And you could still do the same, but as long as you have evaluated whether the other side is being impacted or not. Experiment and experiment and experiment. Again, don't, many times we say, I know this will work, and I roll it out and see this doesn't work, okay? How many times I would guarantee you will be surprised many times than fewer if you know gut feeling, if you go by gut feeling, right? Always experiment, that's always the case. And again, you have to, key part is that you have to know intervention versus no intervention. Who are the customers would be your dead ducks, meaning whatever you do will not move. Who are the customers, even if you don't do anything, will move. Okay? So those two groups you should never do anything as your strategy. And then you find out customers that you actually want to touch and make sure their experience is better, you're able to move them. And lastly but not the least, personalization is not personal. So that means that it is just not dependent on person. It's dependent on time and location. And this is why you actually do continuous experimentation and optimize them. That's all I have today. Thank you. Should we ask questions?
So you mentioned using segmentation first to be able to do these psychographic profiles, but naturally segmentation obviously imposes a sort of structure on your data set. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that affects like the output of your model?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing is there are two ways of doing it. Segmentation is a very interesting thing. I mean, there are two nature of things. One is and I think the best answer is combined. So I'll tell you thing. You can do non-supervised. Let's say you have a blind data set, okay? You know nothing about your customers. Your marketers or your product managers comes and say, or your domain expert comes and says, hey, you know what? These are the business domains, the group of customers I want to see. Right? In worst case, you would kind of know, okay, new versus not new, and people who buys your stuff more versus people who, so you have a high level idea. So you can apply some form of supervised. I would say you start from there. Start from supervised and see if those segments have a distinct behavior. For example, if you're optimizing purchase, you may say, okay, if I segment the way they are telling me, are they actually, can I see distinct behavior? Right? That's one approach, and you elaborate on that. The second approach, you do take a blind approach, saying that just do non-supervised clustering and say which are the distinct clusters that buys the thing more. And then you backtrack. You say, what are their attributes? Are they driving more? Are they driving in the weekends? And then construct a psychographic profile based on that.
Hi, great talk, thanks.
Thank you.
So I was wondering, in addition to time and space, do you also consider other contextual items like the weather, if there's a special event going on in the area, that sort of thing?
Yeah, good question. So in general, those are, we call it as short-term movers. So basically, if you think about us strategically, those are the levers that happens instantly, right? So the way we control for that, so few of those, the reason we don't model that, like we model that's in our forecasting domain, because we want to know if certain events are doing some, moving the levers there. But in case of personalization, the problem with that is that, we typically say, okay, if there is an event is happening, in that event, what's your likely behavior? We don't know beforehand, right? Because that event might be in the city for the first time. Maybe Beyonce's concert is in the city for the first time. We cannot know that, how many people will go there. So the way we do it, that we put the experience in the real time, and then we adjust in the real time. That's called multi-arm bandit. So it's basically in real time, system is figuring out what is working good and bad, and basically optimizing that. So yes, we take care of that, but in an indirect way. Like we basically don't tell the system that there is an event, but system knows because there is more demand in rides or a certain metric, and so system readjust of what to do.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. My question is, my experience with Uber has been, okay, you get offered like a ride pass, and then you become a regular Uber rider, and then the ride pass goes away, and then if you stop using Uber, you get like another carrot. Do you ever think about like, people who might get turned off by having like a carrot dangled out in front of them constantly, either from a driver or rider perspective, and does that ever factor into personas or segmentation?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think this is why we want to make sure that pricing and incentive is not the lever to give the carrot. So because if you think about it, is pricing the only way you can get? So again, my personal take. Some people might have different ideas, but I never see pricing actually as a good lever. I think the thing is incentives is a separate thing. Many things, all of us, if we get some discount, we love to get discount. We'll do certain things. Right? So, so that particular problem, I think, always exists when you give pricing-related carrots, right? So what we are trying to optimize here, for example, if I give you something else, for example, if I tell you that you would be reaching your destination predictability every day, this thing. If I tell you, safety is a big thing for us. If I tell you that whenever you drive or ride with Uber, no matter what time of the day, you would be safe and it's guaranteed. Those are the carrots we want to provide and optimize against and feel better. Price is always like, short term, right? Like, yeah, you would be excited and then you would be not happy if I take the carrot away. So it's not really, optimized that way. So that's what we are focusing on. Oh, great. All right. Thank you all.